All right. Welcome to my talk. I'm Óscar Morales Vivó. You might know me as the guy who was accidentally sabotaging the previous guy's presentation. You probably have seen me around these meetings and a number of other things I've been doing. This whole developing professionally software for Apple platforms for 20-something years now. And today I'm going to talk to a topic. It's going to be more high level than I usually do. Kind of a topic that's a bit close to my heart. English is not my first language. I grew up back in Spain when computers were new, and basically they got to Spain in Spanish quite late and often quite badly. So I often would see people riding the dinosaur to school and kind of say these people would have such an easier time using computers if they could actually understand what it says on them. Eventually, I got into the industry. I worked on a bunch of things. And interestingly, I found myself in my last couple of jobs, including the current one, dealing with apps that are supposed to be localized, but where the effort was not very good. So I found myself giving people in my teams bits and pieces of what has become this presentation. And I'm hoping to save a lot of time going forward by just pointing them to this presentation. So let's start with what we're going to be talking about. There's going to be a bit of an introduction. Why are we talking about this? We're going to talk about the tools, the original tools, original for modern Apple platforms. We're not talking about Mac in 1986 or something. We're talking about the new hotness, and new as in 2 years ago. You can find the presentations in Apple developers side. We're going to do an overview just so people who have not really got noticed that will know about them. I'm going to do a bit of a reflection of why we do we mostly do such a half-assed job of this. And finally, we're going to be doing a bit of an idea of what we should be doing instead. And yeah, we're building UIs. This is about the computer communicating with the user. Basically, the user is people. And, well, have you met any humans lately? They're hard to communicate with. They misunderstand things constantly. They speak in a million different languages, and so some of them sound like gobbledygook to us. And probably us sound like gobbledygook to them. So, yeah, they are diverse lot. It's not just what they talk, but also how they talk and what they understand and how well they understand. We want to meet them where they are. They were supposed to build easy-to-use stuff. Sorry. So I would say, thinking about this, I realized there's a kind of a large overlap with accessibility. We want to do this to make our users able to use the app. Accessibility is thought about more of a kind of physical impediments to using the app the way the designer came up with. But this is kind of very much related to this. The other thing is, computers are basically an American thing. So it's all got built around basically a bunch of American people in American offices doing whatever their American bosses wanted them to do. Which means a lot of assumptions about how human languages code were done based on how English, as used by Americans, works. I found this site recently. It's a fun one, but I'm not going to recite it. It's similar to some others we've seen about things like dates or people's names or addresses and stuff like that. So, well, you think about all of this and the complexity of the human experience. It turns out that this is pretty hard. However, if you use the frameworks the way they are designed, you'll get most of the way there. Now, let's do a quick review of the tools we have to do. We're going to be talking mostly about localizing strings that present to the user. Obviously, there's more dimension to it and as far as internationalization, but this is probably the part we're going to meet the most in code. Well, what happened, what we got now, started at Next. The year was sometime in the 90s. I honestly don't know. It was the future. At that time, they had been basically building GUI apps for about a decade. I mean, probably a bit longer in a couple apps, but Mac came up in 1984. We're in the mid-90s. People kind of already got an idea of how to do this thing. Then there's a bunch of people, mostly PhDs at Next, but for my understanding is that Steve Jobs kind of told them to just go do what they thought was best. And well, they came up with some stuff, and we've been using it for 25 years. So it probably wasn't such a terrible idea to begin with. And honestly, if you look at the internals, it's still what we're doing today. A second here, I'm trying to get, all right. So it's basically all around this single call. I put the Objective-C version with, had to remove a few annotations so it would fit in the slide. It all ends up boiling down to this, but you don't use this normally. You used, again, I'm talking good olden times. We're using one of these C macros. There was also no real overload or anything, so there you go. And then you run this command line thing that literally just looks for that macro in the text and does things when it finds it. So not incredibly sophisticated, really. And basically, once you do all of that, you get, as a result, you've probably seen these ones, this kind of fun file formatted in a way that nothing else has been formatted since before the 21st century. Now, we probably many of us have been using this, unwittingly or not. Thankfully, 2 years ago, Apple decided that maybe it's time to kind of put a coat of paint on all of this. So yeah, finally, we have new apps, we have modern apps. We should maybe have tools from less than 20 years ago. So they came up with string catalogs. I will be talking more about them. They condense all of those million little files you were putting all over the place into a much smaller set of one file. Also, especially for those who do things like plurals, you can now do them without risking accidentally summoning the old ones from their slumber in the lightless depths beneath the waves. You have localized string resource, which is a tiny little thing that comes in really handy. And finally, yeah, it's kind of like, oh, if only we had a programming language where it's easy to pack a bunch of little data things together. So yeah, they brought us a struct. And finally, it's something you might have been using inadvertently, but it's actually really powerful. You can now use it string interpolation for creating localized strings. There's a lot of Swift type system trickery, which I cannot claim to understand, but it does work. Now, yeah, in case you really like doing things with the command line, you can now, GenString actually knows how to deal with Swift UI, and you can actually have Xcode kind of pre-build the app and extract things in a much smarter way than we used to. Not everything is perfect, though. The main problem I found using these tools is that they don't like macros. They don't like custom macros. There is some, guess they never tested that. If you have custom macros and dependent Swift syntax, things kind of break down. The whole part of the system where it will generate normally the strings files, but if you want to export them, which is kind of useful if you want someone to translate them, it just won't work. It's a known issue. I've complained personally to Apple engineers about it. We cross our fingers and hope that eventually they'll fix it. I actually have some amount of hope for this year. There's a few bugs and glitches. The editor sometimes will decide to do random weird things or decide that it doesn't want to be an editor and just show you the text of the file. It's nothing too grievous, however. And yeah, pretty much my impression for using this for about over a year now is that it's actually pretty good for an Xcode feature, especially one as young as this. We like when they bring them, but they are not always our favorite childs. So, and also the other thing I found is that other than the macro thing, pretty much any bugs and glitches you find are really easy to work around. I'll give some idea of how later. So we have old tools, we have new tools. And now, before we present kind of my recommendations, I'm going to say, why are we still doing such a half-assed job of this? So, the average quote-unquote localized Apple platform app is the programming equivalent of thinking that if you go to the other side of the world and you talk in American English really loud and slow, everyone will understand you. So you normally go through your code base and you UI-Kit code base and you find something like this. It's like something, and it's localized string, whatever. Next line of code. Now you're writing Swift and you have like button something. And well, that one's funny because that one's localizable. It's like the Swift UI designers decided to trick us into making those localizable strings. It's like, oh wow, we're so smart, we're tricking everyone into doing localizable stuff. Problem, everyone is doing localizable stuff in a pretty terrible way. It's kind of like minimal effort, which hasn't really gotten us to a better place than we were before. And also ends up accidentally polluting all of our localizable string resource set with random things that we put into controls that shouldn't be localized. So, there's part of the problem that this is our problem. Some of you, I'm sure, are doing the right thing. This is not about you folks. It's okay. So, and it's the usual issue. We are not bothering. So we're not bothering with semantics. We just, whatever, English string, there it goes. Those of us who kind of understand a bit of English grammar know that English is not a great language for precision. Every word can be a noun, a verb, an adjective, and a few other things sometimes as well. So you can have the same string in a large app, you can have the same English string that actually means 4 different things in different places. Yeah, another issue I found often is that basically you build a format and you put a bunch of things together with the assumption that any other language that's going to build that format is just going to work the same way, which is not usually the case. Now, we're also not bothering organizing things. We just say, whatever, here's a localizable string, do your thing, machine. And then you build the app, and there's basically a file with 3,500 localizable strings in there, which you send to someone, and then that someone, I guess it's probably not the first time he sees something like that. They do their best. They get paid for it. But yeah, there's no real, everything ends in the main bundle because that's where you've told everything to go. Your very modular app is not very modular when it comes to this. We're also not bothering with comments. And this is one that's pretty easy to explain. It's like code comments, and then you go and say, well, my code doesn't need comments. And then I say, well, the translator is not getting your code, so maybe you should comment it there. So you need to give the translator some context almost all of the time. Now, this is the stuff, our stuff. There's another stuff, which is another problem, which is also partially the framework's responsibility. And I would like you to kind of understand what I want to get to with this slide. Basically, a string that you display in the UI is not really a string. It's a concept of a string. It's something that resolves to a string. It's a formula for calculating a string based on the current environment. And this is something you've probably been seeing a lot lately, now that we're moving more and more towards the dynamic UIs. It's like colors, it's like font sizes, it's like so many other things where you kind of put a thing there and then it gets resolved when it wants to build the actual thing that shows up in the screen. However, the frameworks don't do a good job to communicate that concept. Even though in SwiftUI you can see that it's there, it's not how people look at it. And UIKit, no, they never really gave it much thought. So understanding that and understanding the tools and understanding what we were kind of half-assing, what should we be doing now? These are going to be some recommendations, kind of easy ways that will not make you work harder and will get you most of the way there. If you actually work at a company that cares about this, there's probably some setups, some automations. Please work with those people to make them better, but you already have kind of a guideline. This is for, I'm writing my code or I'm writing a code that's not really doing a good job and I want it to do a good job. So the first thing I would recommend is move to strings catalog already. It's like a no-brainer, complete no-brainer. Like 99% no-brainer. I found one edge case the other day where it kind of was a bit of trouble and I had to manually tweak something to make it work. But I migrated 2 large code bases to string catalogs and it's worked quite well. It's like I clicked on the Xcode thing and it did it. And that's like, wait, that's not how Xcode is supposed to behave. But I wasn't going to complain too much about that. So once you do that, I would also recommend having a look at the results. You can, now that you got everything into a nice file with a nice editor, you can probably easily see a number of easy to clean up things. Like those plurals I mentioned earlier. Now you no longer have to go into files and write them in the dialect of Mordor. Now you can just use a quick editor to build a little thing that says how it should work. Now you're probably going to find a bunch of strings that you didn't know were there, that maybe they shouldn't be there, or maybe they were accidentally being created as a localizable. Happens a lot with SwiftUI code. You can probably go and not easy sometimes to find where it comes from, but you can often find where the SwiftUI is being created with a bunch of things. For example, a very typical place is previews. You just generate some stuff with strings, and then those strings get extracted into localization. And so, yeah, that's kind of easy to find. You probably don't want to send that to the translators. It's a waste of time. Now, also, for those cases where things don't work, you can look at the source. It's an extremely easy to understand JSON file. It's pretty much what you see in the editor in JSON form. If you don't like, the editor is not letting you do what you want, you just edit it yourself. You got to be a bit careful because obviously if you edit something and then you build again and then it regenerates things, it's probably going to overwrite your stuff. But in some cases, it's kind of the way to kick it into working. Now, I hope you won't have any problems with this. This one's a bit more involved. I would recommend moving pretty much everything you can to using localized string resource. It's kind of packaging it up. It's like making clear that this is not just a string. This is a little package of things that will become a string when you put it into the UI. So for Swift UI, it's more of a matter of habit. As I mentioned, don't use the ones that use Swift UI does have APIs that take localized string resource directly. So use those instead of using the ones that take a quote-unquote localized string key, which is actually not a string as you thought it was. Yeah, as I mentioned, if you actually have like a string that you want as is, something you got from the server, for example, you use the verbatim ones, because that's basically for static strings. For actual string types, it will just pass them directly. But if you have like a static string that you need to display as is, just use the verbatim one. For UIKit, it's a bit more annoying because pretty much none of UIKit is built for this. A thing I've done for a few very common controls like UI level is just set a small function that takes one of these. It's a one-liner, but you don't need to write that one-liner every day. And in some cases, you probably can find ways to regular expression that into lint rules to keep people from doing that, the bad thing. Another thing that I recommend very much is instead of, you have some code here and suddenly giant splotch of localizable text in the middle, just take those out of the code. Put them where you put the other resources. But not too far. Kind of, if you have a string you only use in one file, just put it in the same file. Make it private. This is normally how I declare them myself. It's a bit of a kind of trickery because using function saves me from having to figure out what key to use for the localizable string. And then basically default value, comment, and everything gets built into the right thing. And then the one part where it becomes even more fun is when you have parameters, because now you can take advantage. By the way, I got tired of using the same keynote animation at some point. You can just build a little function and pass in the parameters and interpolate them into the string. And it all works. You can look at the string catalog later and it will itself have figured out what goes after the backslash. So now, of course, if you have strings that you use all over the place, you'll want to put them in a place where you can access from everywhere. So like this one, I kind of put this in subcode myself. It's like you put it somewhere, and that way you know it's the same copy everywhere. And if the designer decides they want to kind of change the copy, you just change it here. But it gets declared the same way, also for the ones with parameters. Now you've done all of this. It's quite a lot of lines of code, but it's very out of the way. So it doesn't matter too much. Kind of doesn't distract you, your actual code is a lot less distracting because you don't have the giant splotches of here, so I'm defining a localizable string in it. How you use it, it's pretty easy. You just use the dot syntax. That's also why I recommend having declared them like that. Same thing with the functions. There's a button which basically gets the thing, it's localized already, no problem. Now, I'm telling you all of this, and maybe you will think some of my recommendations are great, maybe not. But the hard part normally is to make sure that people do it. And I do, well, this would normally be the part of the presentation where I try to sell all of you into my package. However, this was code I wrote for work, and I no longer work there. So you'll have to take my word for it that it's not hard to write. as I mentioned earlier, it's just a JSON file with a very obvious structure. You probably can have the codable structs to read it in half an hour. And then you can just process it and you can validate a number of things you want to validate normally. You can, for example, make sure that everything in there has a comment. If there's no comment, just error out the script, make CI sad. People will learn. You can tell them, oh, you have some strings here that no one's using anymore. Maybe you should delete them. Same with translations. The system will mark the translations as maybe they are not good anymore if you change the string, but even if the key is the same. So you can basically, normally my recommendation would be to delete them, and then they run through the translators again, and you get the new ones. And in a pinch, and I did have to do this, you can literally, you have all of this structure, you can literally write it out in a different format that you can export and import. That code base was very much TCA land, so they were using macros all over the place, and we had no good way to export to our translators without doing it by hand. But it did work fine. So, that's pretty much it. Muchas gracias. Esperamos que les haya gustado nuestra presentación. And also, if anyone wants to ask any questions, it's not too late yet.
Hey, thank you. A couple of years ago, Apple, kind of like half remembering this, introduced something called like automatic gender agreement, automatic grammar agreement. Is it good? Is it bad?
There's some extremely advanced APIs I've been looking at recently to do that. I'm not sure how much of it can be done automatically. There's a lot of stuff that kind of needs to be marked to be done one way or the other. I think most UIs I dealt with, they are kind of very neutral about this. So I normally don't run into situations where I kind of have to think about switching genders or stuff like that. I guess for things like I'm maybe most social or stuff like that, you might run into that. In which case, I would just say, I guess, go look at the APIs. They are not something that I could easily understand just from reading the documentation. I'll tell you that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I think one of the perhaps more interesting things, and it's been a while since I've worked with localization, has been working with translators. Have there been any tooling to like basically go through the whole end-to-end cycle of like, you know, you've got the annotations, now you ship the string catalog off to the translators, it comes back. Generally, there needs to be some new UI adjustment to associate with that, and editing and copy and all that stuff. And so is there any tooling to improve that whole cycle, or is it pretty much the same?
So the good news of the tooling being pretty much the same forever is that this is mostly a solved problem. Basically, export to XLIF has been in Xcode for 5, 6, 7 years at least. And that's the part that breaks if you have macros, by the way. And also most translators, they just send them a bunch of .strings files. They also know how to deal with them. Again, because they've been dealing with the same stuff for a million years now. As far as integration, importing an Xcode, assuming you don't break it with macros, seems to work reasonably well. We're doing it automatically on my current job, and I have not seen anything running into trouble. We had to do it by hand at the previous job before that, and again, it wasn't much of a problem. The only issue is sometimes something would come in translated that was no longer needed or something like that, but none of that was like a crazy breaking problem.
Okay, but then I guess what you're saying is that like everything is still XLIF And
Yeah,
largely
at some
the-
point an xlib happens and that gets sent to the translators and then they send you another one. But or you can just send them a folder with .strings files if you really feel like being old-fashioned. I mean, again, they have tooling to deal with that because that's what they get sent.
One more. Perfect. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot.